when it comes down to the pig trough that sometimes is Lansing.
Yeah.
Because they do hold those keystone positions. It is wrong, though, Josh. I agree.
I mean, there's, on the other hand, it was originally, obviously, that can't have been the intention. Maybe it was, but I could see the value in, if thousands of bills are thrown out there, of having somebody at least do an initial screening to see what's worth their time if it's limited. But
yeah, but by what standards?
Is there a veto process? Is there a process by which the other members could say, you denied it, but maybe if there's 50% of us want to see it?
That's an interesting thought. I've never heard of that ever being done. Doesn't mean that a rule doesn't exist for it.
Yeah. The only thing I've ever heard of is discharging it to the floor.
And that's a process by which a bill in committee can be pulled out of committee and taken straight to the floor without a committee vote, which is how they had to get the MMFLA language taken out of the Senate Judiciary Committee because Senator Rick Jones had gerrymandered the fuck out of it so badly. Even his own fellow Republicans would not vote to approve that bill, and it had to be removed from committee because it was heinous.
Yes.
And when that version came back... Yep, and when that version came back to the House, a lot of people that originally supported it when it went through the House did not support the Senate version because it was so different.
It really was different. It was very different. But
now that Josh got out of his mood, what he wanted to talk about, let me throw out a couple of things.
You had your moment in the sun, Josh.
No, it's fine. It's a good topic.
I'm sorry, I was just trying to filibuster for a minute there.
I didn't interfere.
He's looking very...
filibustering?
He looks very, very filibustery.
He's got his beard going.
It's like he's getting paid too much to me.
What?
That's probably true.
He's actually
probably
like
true.
an attorney today. He doesn't have his pajamas and slippers on.
Not enough oversight. Not enough oversight.
It's funny because we had a meeting today with a potential client, and I was like, you know what? I feel like I should dress up. It seems like it's important. But then I overdressed Michael, and I'm like, what do I do now? Do I unbutton the shirt?
Well, that's why there's insecurity. You overdressed. Oh, I understand now.
Did you notice how the client, even when you're talking, was just staring at me?
All right, you got to shut her down at a point when you're on a high note.
I wish there was a video here because there's an interesting look thing going on right now.
So, one of the things Rick mentioned in the news, Josh, why don't you talk about that?
I did.
What did you talk about?
I talked a little bit about hemp.
Right,
Thanks.
exactly. Missing my
Josh
point
saved the day with hemp.
Yeah. There was something that Rick mentioned in the news about a story that he was talking about.
Oh, yeah.
What was that?
A fascinating story out of Detroit.
Who are the lawyers on that case?
And
was Comorn Law involved in that?
They might have been a little bit involved.
That's right.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, one might say that there were multiple law firms involved ahead of time and finally cleared the way when Comorn stepped in.
Yeah,
noticeably absent from the report I read in the news, though. That's so sad.
There's one report that was, in fact, had me mentioned. The word
celebrity attorney.
No. It was not. It was something like
the original attorney's name on it. I think it was Nancy, actually.
Semantics. What was I don't know? It's just like, but they were actually going to return on that. Remember, we actually posted.
Yeah, and then
anyways, there's some verification, Rick.
Oh, I don't need to verify. You said it. I trust you.
I know.
So I saw a report. I thought it said Comorn and Barton Morris.
That's right. And a guy named David Grime.
Okay.
In Detroit.
Yeah, we had a nice follow-up conversation with a lady from the Detroit News.
As often happens when you talk to media, they totally forget about you when they write the story. I know.
Well, they originally reported on it, and I was originally involved, and there was some, I don't know. But listen, you'll see, but this is the answer and what I wanted to talk about was what happened there. What happened? It's good news. But what's the story? The story was the police are reporting that there's this sophisticated $1 million illegal grow operation.
They get excited when you say those numbers.
Well, certainly, we're going to be talking about those quotes when we sue them, because the value of the sophistication and whatnot is going to be determined by them. And
the
their
Detroit
testimony.
News called it $1 million grow.
So didn't they?
No, they were quoted.
Oh,
the officers on the
officers saying this $1 million.
Stand in the grow. See this right here? This is like a very sophisticated.
Is part of the story somebody returned to the property, keys are just hanging out in front of the door, and meanwhile, like the equipment had been.
Well,
No, there's two parts of the story. Number one is the alleged entry onto and into was that, and they tried to give props to it, that the Border Patrol had been investigating a body or someone that had fallen into the water, jumped the water, and they came out of the property. Smelled marijuana. And what's interesting is in the investigation, there was some attempts to check with the local authorities to see whether this was a zoned facility for and under the emergency rules, and whether or not they were and the information
And the state.
the information came back was that it was not. Okay? Now, that issue was not an argument that anyone made, like they were not properly licensed, or that the checking of it at the time that responded with they were not inaccurately was a justification for what they did. That was not the argument. The argument was that, from our perspective, that this prosecution can't take place because they're immune from any of this. You cannot prosecute individuals that are licensed to do the behavior you're accusing them doing illegally. There was this completely, what I call, existential argument that was going on between ourselves and the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office kind of before the case began, and that continued on in the background of what they were really saying, which was trying to answer the question, how is it that they think they can go from a 72 plant facility to 1,500, right? See what I'm saying? I even got them to admit in court that they would agree that their authority from the city and the state was to sell marijuana differently than the MMA to anyone they want as a provisioning center license to do that. They were arguing that couldn't cultivate, that no license have ever been given for any of this, but certainly not for cultivation. How do you get from 72 to 1,500? Well, there's a path. It's outlined, the same path that the people that are selling cannabis retail under the rules, same path for getting to 1,500 plants. And you know what they said to me? I don't believe it. There's no way. It was interesting because it supports the main point of all of this. Their theory was, listen, the way the MMA was structured and the way we interpret it allowed us to come up with technical BS violations to screw your world over. If you were, it gave us all these methods to criminalize your behavior with marijuana. Tight. Police calling the shots. You're telling me you can go from 72 to 1,500 with marijuana like that? I don't believe it. There's no way they would ever allow marijuana to be that loosey-goosey. It's no longer a controlled substance. That's what she was saying. That's what they're saying. They're acknowledging. There's no way you can, because if you ask one of these facilities, what's the most amount of marijuana? Jamie, remember at the Bay City, I got asked the question, your event, how much marijuana can a transporter bring to a facility operating under the emergency rules? I was like, come on, don't make it difficult. You know what I mean?
There's all these things that have to happen in order to facilitate
correct.
Those rules, but no real.
But
detail on how
that's
to
it.
carry it out.
My legal answer was just try to carry not more than 15, or what you would be allowed to carry in the MMA. Right. Make a couple of trips if you got to defend it for that reason. Yep. Okay, but the question of how much marijuana can somebody have on site at one of these facilities is we don't have an answer to that. Okay, right. Now if that's an answer, and you go from 72 to 1,500 by being approved and zoned and tested to get a license, and you file it by December 15th, and you can go from 72 to 1,500, and you can sell marijuana to anyone that's got a card other than completely different than the MMA's limitations, and receive complete immunity. Then, what you're saying is the Schedule 1, Schedule 2, dangerous drug, forever, is being loosey-goosey taxed, peddled, contracted for, without any limitations at all, under the pretext of a regulated system that isn't even in effect yet, and there's nothing even close to a seed-to-sale tracking program. Tell me now, in any world, honestly, can this be a controlled substance? How can it be? It is the opposite of controlled. It is barely regulated.
It certainly doesn't meet any of the descriptions of Schedule 1.
Or 2, or 3, or 4.
Agreed.
All those are made by a pharmacy, distributed at pharmacy. Made in a pharmaceutical company, distributed at pharmacy. People have federal licenses.
Certainly can't.
And
be
in a system that is so tightly bound and supervised by the federal government and the punishments of those things existing with the Controlled Substance Act, the limitations of people who can get there, the people that can participate in all that. That's not who this is for. if you have someone in a place, how many, what's the limitation or what's my, what are the regulations on fentanyl at my pharmacy? There's an answer. I promise you that. Okay? Laura will tell you, we don't know how much you can have in a site right now. That is not a control. That is not a dangerous drug. It's not on the list. It's not a narcotic.
And they don't know after 30 days after your license either, because you have 30 days to collect as much as you can from as many people as you can, and then you start the metric system.
There you go. And you know what? Nobody knows this. Because of that case, maybe people know this, but because of that case, it made me revisit the specific language of the emergency rules. And people may not think of it in this context, but the legislature, when it created the MMFLA, there's Section 2, which directs the creation of the emergency rules. And in the emergency rules, it says, at the direction of the legislature, and for the purposes of preventing a state of emergency, we must provide access safely for patients to get their cannabis. And therefore, we're going to go forward so there is not a state of emergency. And we're going to loosey-goosey let 1,500 plant places grow. We're going to let people sell marijuana to any of these people coming and going. We're not going to treat this like a Schedule 1. We're not going to treat this. We're going to treat this like lettuce you would have in a market. That's what I say. It's not a Schedule 1 anymore. Anyone want to take me on this? Bring it. Jimmy?
The only thing I would say is I would be careful what you ask for.
Well, there's always a concern about going to Schedule 2 in the pharmaceutical.
I'm not talking about Schedule 2. It is not Schedule. Arguably, it's Schedule 2 already because of the MMMA. It refers to it Schedule 2. That's bullshit. Schedule 2 is a number. It's Schedule 2 on the controlled substances list.
It's highly addictive. It has no medicinal value.
Clearly.
Could be dangerous.
There are drugs that are dispensed by the state regulations that are in a controlled system that are done a certain way. This shit that they set up, the MMFLA, is a administrative, regulated system. It's like the steel industry. It's like it's not the controlled substance drug pharmaceutical industry. There are It's recreated. It's like the gaming industry.
Schedule 2 through 5, doesn't it have to be prescribed by a doctor?
Recommended.
They all have to be prescribed by a doctor. This does not require it. Therefore, it's not controlled.
A doctor recommendation.
So that is a First Amendment exercise of the suggestion that you may or may not, without any oversight, without any controls of telling them how much to take it, having any limitations on dosing, frequency of use, etc. That is not a controlled system.
Isn't the only reason that it's not being treated that way is because doctors' federal licensing?
Yes.
This is not federal.
But
we're talking about this being
right, but
at the state level. Marijuana cannot be considered.
If the state of Michigan had their way in how they'd operate and didn't have to be concerned that doctors were going to lose licenses, doctors would prescribe it.
That's not the issue.
It would be dispensed from pharmacies.
It's not going to change.
First of all, you're assuming that because
it's still going to be federally illegal.
Just because something is logical means that it's lawful. Okay? What you're saying is the lawful conclusion that any reasonable adult would arrive at. That doesn't necessarily make it the law of the land, though, and we both know this.
No, I'm saying that it is a new era because of these things. If I disagreed with but accepted what has happened to date, it can be put in these simple words. The Michigan Medical Marijuana Act did not amend the Public Health Code. It created a small number of limitations of people that are in compliance with, unequivocal compliance, right?
Exemptions from the law, right?
Exactly. So it still exists in these prohibitions, and therefore the government doesn't need to go and find out if you're a patient before they kick in your door for the smell of marijuana, right? So that's the accepted position. Okay. Now, what happened with the MMFLA? Well, they created an entirely new mechanism of who is protected. It's well beyond that limited class of people, and their behavior in the state relative to the Public Health Code are well beyond the protections and limitations of the MMA. It is and for no reason other than they're getting licensed. So the idea that a law has been limited to a limited class of people, and that's the reason why it doesn't have the same protective impact to encapsulate the entire Public Health Code. The MMFLA has a statewide limit. The limitations are not by classes of people per se, but they're licensees that have gotten it, and those that are working there, and people that maybe engaging with it and possessing it. It's a whole new world, and they're doing it for reasons